Imagine walking through the streets of a city where every corner echoes with fervent chants of devotion, where the lines between fear and faith blur, and where a single man's vision can dictate the lives of thousands. This was Münster in the 1530s, a city gripped by religious fervor, social unrest, and a longing for radical change. At the center of this storm stood Jan van Leiden, a man of humble beginnings who would rise to proclaim himself the King of Münster. Under his rule, the city experienced radical social experiments, extreme religious reforms, and a political authority that challenged every existing norm. Loyalty to Jan was no longer a matter of preference, it became a matter of survival. How did Jan van Leiden achieve such influence? What drove ordinary citizens to follow him with unwavering devotion, even when his decrees became extreme? And most importantly, what lessons does this historical episode hold for us today, in a world where extremism still captures imaginations and divides societies? In this video, we will explore the life of Jan van Leiden, tracing his rise from obscurity to power, the dramatic and controversial rule of his religious kingdom, and the ultimate collapse of his ambitions. This is a story of faith, ambition, human psychology, and the consequences of unchecked ideology, a story that is as gripping as any thriller and as tragic as history itself. The Germany of the early 16th century was not a single unified nation. Instead, it was a patchwork of independent principalities, free cities, and ecclesiastical territories, all technically under the Holy Roman Empire. Power was fragmented. Local princes, city councils, and bishops wielded authority, but enforcement of law and order varied wildly. In some cities, rulers were weak or corrupt, leaving ordinary citizens vulnerable to radical ideas. Münster, a prosperous city with a mixture of merchants, artisans, and peasants, would become one of the most striking examples of this vulnerability. This political fragmentation meant that radical movements could rise in one city without immediate suppression from central authorities. The Holy Roman Empire had no single standing army or centralized bureaucracy capable of quelling uprisings quickly. In this environment, charismatic leaders with radical visions could seize attention and followers, sometimes with devastating consequences. At the same time, Europe was in the throes of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517 had challenged the Catholic Church's authority, criticizing practices like the sale of indulgences and calling for a return to Scripture. These ideas spread like wildfire, inspiring both hope and fear. Some groups sought moderate reform. Others, like the Anabaptists, pursued radical social and religious change.
The Anabaptists rejected infant baptism, advocating for adult baptism as a conscious, personal choice. They also challenged the established social order, promoting communal living, equality among believers, and a strict moral code based on their interpretation of Scripture. To many authorities, these were dangerous ideas that threatened the existing hierarchy, both religious and political. Germany in the 16th century was also grappling with economic instability. Famine, crop failures, and outbreaks of plague created widespread suffering. Urban centers like Münster faced overcrowding, unemployment, and tensions between wealthy elites and struggling citizens. The underclass was often desperate, willing to follow anyone promising change, equality, or divine justice. Religious movements thrived in such conditions. When daily life was harsh and unpredictable, faith became both a source of hope and a tool for control. Promises of a godly kingdom, communal prosperity, and salvation could inspire obedience, even to the point of blind loyalty. Münster's citizens were no different. Their city was a tinderbox of social frustration, religious zeal, and political instability. Münster was a prosperous, walled city with a population of roughly 15,000 to 20,000 people. It had a thriving merchant class, artisans, and a rural hinterland providing food and labor. But beneath the surface of wealth, the city simmered with tension. The clergy and city council maintained strict control over religious practice, and the local bishop had political authority that sometimes conflicted with civic leaders. For many residents, the existing authorities seemed more concerned with maintaining wealth and power than addressing hunger, disease, or spiritual needs. Radical preachers could exploit these frustrations, offering a vision of justice, equality, and divine order that resonated with the suffering population. Münster, with its mix of wealth, unrest, and strategic location, became the perfect stage for Jan van Leiden's rise. In the 16th century, religion governed every aspect of life. Moral conduct, legal obligations, social hierarchy, everything was seen through a lens of divine authority. The idea of divine justice was not abstract, it was immediate, tangible, and often intertwined with political governance. People genuinely believed that God's will could justify rebellion, punishment, or radical reform. This worldview made Münster's citizens fertile ground for radical leadership. When a charismatic figure like Jan van Leiden claimed divine guidance, many were willing to follow. The lines between faith, fear, and political loyalty blurred, creating a society where obedience was framed not just as civic duty, but as spiritual necessity. By the early 1330s, Münster was a city on the brink. Religious reform was sweeping across Europe. Social and economic pressures created unrest, and within this volatile environment, Jan van Leiden would emerge, a man capable of harnessing faith, ambition, and desperation to seize control.
His story would not be simple. It would involve radical religious experiments, unprecedented social upheaval, and human drama that reads like fiction. But it was real, and its lessons echo across the centuries. Understanding this historical context is essential before we dive into the man himself, for it explains not only how he rose, but why so many were willing to follow him, even to the point of their own destruction. Jan van Leiden was born around 1509 in the small village of Friesland in what is now the Netherlands. His beginnings were unremarkable. His family was poor, with no political influence or wealth to pass down. From a young age, however, Jan showed signs of ambition and a restless mind. While other children were content with the predictable rhythm of village life, Jan was curious, questioning authority, and drawn to religious study. Historians suggest that Jan may have been influenced by the spiritual ferment of his time. The Reformation had swept across Northern Europe, challenging centuries-old authority and offering radical ideas about salvation and personal responsibility. For a young man like Jan, hungry for significance and power, these ideas were not abstract theology, they were a roadmap to influence, a way to command attention and followers. As a teenager, Jan left Friesland and traveled to larger towns, including Münster, seeking opportunities in education. He learned the power of words, preaching, and persuasion. He observed both the devotion of believers and the fear that clergy and local authorities inspired. These lessons would prove invaluable. Jan realized early on that charisma, combined with a sense of divine mission, could allow a man of humble origins to rise above ordinary society. Jan's exposure to radical religious thought intensified in Münster, a city itself a hotbed of social and theological ferment. The Anabaptists, considered dangerous radicals by many, rejected infant baptism in favor of voluntary adult baptism. They preached communal living, equality among believers, and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. Jan was drawn to these ideas not simply as a theologian, but as a strategist. He saw in the Anabaptist movement a vehicle to achieve influence. His understanding of Scripture, combined with his ability to speak passionately and persuasively, made him a natural leader. Those around him began to notice his charisma and his gift for inspiring loyalty. It is said that Jan did not shy away from controversy. While other preachers focused on moral instruction or piety, he spoke of a world reshaped by divine law, where the meek could inherit power and sin would be punished swiftly and publicly. He framed himself not as a mere teacher, but as a man chosen by God to guide the faithful. To understand Jan's rise, we need to understand the followers he gathered. Many were ordinary citizens, frustrated by economic hardship, social inequality, and the corruption of established authorities. They sought hope, purpose, and justice. The Anabaptists offered a vision where power and property were shared, sins were judged strictly but fairly, and obedience to God came before obedience to man.
Jan's speeches were electrifying. He emphasized moral rigor and divine purpose, promising a city transformed by God's will. His followers were captivated. They believed that joining him was not simply political, it was a spiritual necessity. Every sermon, every ritual, every public act reinforced the idea that Jan was not just a leader, but an instrument of God. One chronicler of the time wrote, "He had a voice that commanded attention, a presence that seemed to radiate authority. When he spoke of God's law and the coming kingdom, the people listened, hanging on every word as if their very salvation depended on it." This ability to blend charisma, fear, and faith became Jan's most powerful tool. He understood human psychology in a way few leaders ever do. People crave meaning, structure, and purpose. When ordinary life fails to provide it, they are willing to follow someone who promises certainty, even if that certainty demands radical action. Before seizing Münster, Jan tested his leadership abilities in smaller, subtler ways. He organized study groups, led prayer meetings, and began influencing local congregations. He also demonstrated an aptitude for strategy, identifying both allies and potential rivals within the Anabaptist movement. Jan understood that ideas alone were insufficient. Power required organization, loyalty, and timing. He carefully built a network of followers who trusted him implicitly. By the early 1530s, he was no longer a peripheral figure. He had become a central player in Münster's radical religious community. His reputation grew, not only among the Anabaptists, but also among authorities, who began to view him with suspicion. They noticed his ability to inspire loyalty, his public declarations of moral and religious authority, and his growing following among Münster's citizens. Several factors converged to make Münster ripe for radical change. Political tensions, economic stress, and religious fervor created a volatile environment. Local authorities were viewed as corrupt or ineffective. Ordinary citizens were frustrated with social hierarchies and hungry for change. Into this environment stepped Jan van Leiden. His message was radical but appealing. A city governed by divine law, where social and economic inequalities would be corrected, and where the faithful would inherit not only spiritual salvation, but tangible power and influence. His rise was rapid. Within months, Jan had become a leading figure in Münster, gaining followers through sermons, personal charisma, and strategic alliances. His reputation for strict moral enforcement, combined with promises of communal prosperity, drew more and more citizens into his fold. Jan's appeal went beyond his theological knowledge. He was a master of persuasion, combining confidence with a deep understanding of human nature. He inspired devotion through a mix of fear, hope, and personal magnetism.
People followed him because they believed in his mission and because he made them feel that their participation was essential to achieving divine justice. He also understood the symbolic power of rituals, public gatherings, and dramatic pronouncements. Every sermon, every baptism, and every communal event was carefully crafted to reinforce his authority and the perception of divine approval. Jan's leadership style was simultaneously inspiring and intimidating. He encouraged loyalty but demanded obedience. He presented himself as a man of God, yet his presence alone carried weight. To question Jan was to question God himself. By the early 1530s, Jan had laid the groundwork for something extraordinary. He had followers, influence, and a clear vision to transform Münster into a city governed entirely by God's law, free from worldly corruption. He also understood the importance of timing. Radical change requires both opportunity and preparation. Münster's social unrest, combined with Jan's growing authority, set the stage for an unprecedented religious and political experiment, a citywide transformation that would capture history's attention and terrify neighboring authorities. The pieces were falling into place. Jan van Leiden, once a young man of humble beginnings, was about to lead one of the most dramatic and controversial uprisings of the Reformation era. The rise of Münster would be a story of faith, power, and human ambition, and it all began with the careful cultivation of trust, charisma, and belief among the city's citizens. By 1534, Münster had become the epicenter of a radical religious movement. Jan van Leiden, now a prominent Anabaptist leader, had gathered thousands of followers, both the devout and the desperate. Citizens who were frustrated with the city council and clergy found hope in his vision, a city governed by divine law, free from corruption, and where the faithful would inherit both spiritual and temporal rewards. The city was on edge. Ordinary life had become unpredictable. Famine, economic strain, and political instability left people vulnerable. Into this uncertainty stepped Jan, with his promises of justice, order, and salvation. His message resonated. People were ready to act, and Jan had the charisma, strategy, and timing to lead them. The Anabaptists, under Jan's leadership, moved quickly and decisively. On February 10, 1534, the movement took control of Münster. This was not a chaotic mob, it was a calculated takeover. Armed groups, organized and disciplined, seized key locations in the city. The city council was overthrown, and the bishop, who had once wielded both spiritual and political authority, was forced into exile. Jan van Leiden's rise to power was both swift and strategic. He combined religious fervor with military planning, understanding that seizing a city required more than ideology. It required coordination, discipline, and timing. Within days, the Anabaptists controlled Münster. Citizens were faced with a new reality. The city was no longer governed by earthly authorities, but by leaders who claimed divine mandate.
In January 1535, Jan van Leiden crowned himself the King of Münster, adopting the title King of New Jerusalem. The ceremony was elaborate and symbolic. Draped in ceremonial robes and surrounded by devoted followers, Jan proclaimed that he was chosen by God to lead the city and establish a heavenly kingdom on earth. This act was more than theatrical, it was psychological warfare. By positioning himself as God's representative, Jan demanded not just obedience, but reverence. Citizens were no longer simply residents, they were participants in a divine experiment. The line between faith and governance had been erased, and Jan's authority was absolute. Jan's rule introduced radical reforms. Property was communalized, wealth redistributed, and citizens were required to adhere to strict moral codes. Polygamy was introduced as a social experiment, justified as a means to populate the city with faithful followers. The enforcement of religious laws was severe. Anyone who resisted was either exiled, imprisoned, or publicly punished. The city became a living laboratory for radical Anabaptist ideals. Work, worship, and social life were intertwined, with Jan at the center of every decision. Religious ceremonies were frequent, designed to reinforce the idea that obedience to Jan was obedience to God. The psychological impact on citizens was profound. Fear and devotion coexisted. People followed orders not only out of belief, but also out of a very real concern for personal survival. Life in Münster under Jan van Leiden was intense, immersive, and inescapable. For the ordinary citizen, life in Münster was dramatically different. Streets were patrolled by Anabaptist guards, sermons filled the public squares, and citizens were required to participate in religious rituals. Every action was scrutinized for compliance with divine law. Polygamy became one of the most controversial aspects of Jan's rule. Jan himself took multiple wives, setting an example for his followers. Women, often caught between religious duty and personal desire, had to navigate this radical new social order. While some embraced it as divine command, others struggled in silence, their lives controlled by religious decree. Communal living was enforced, with property and wealth redistributed to reflect equality among believers. While this appealed to the poor and disenfranchised, it created tension with those who had previously enjoyed wealth or status. Jan's reforms were both revolutionary and divisive, transforming Münster into a city of extremes. Faith, devotion, fear, and inequality existed side by side. Not everyone in the region accepted Münster's new order. The prince-bishop, previously exiled, began organizing a response. In 1534, a coalition of forces, including the bishop's loyalists and neighboring armies, laid siege to the city. The siege of Münster would last over a year, turning the city into a fortress of desperation and determination.
Within the walls, life was harsh. Food became scarce and disease spread rapidly. Citizens were forced to endure famine and hardship while maintaining their religious duties. Jan van Leiden, as king, presented himself as the divine protector of the city, promising that those who remained faithful would survive and inherit a heavenly reward. During the siege, Jan's leadership style became more extreme. Orders were enforced ruthlessly. Public punishments, sermons, and displays of devotion were used to maintain control and morale. Dissent was not tolerated. Spies and informants ensured that even whispers of rebellion were quickly suppressed. Despite the suffering, many citizens remained loyal. Jan's charisma, combined with the psychological power of religion, kept the population bound to his authority. Followers believed that yielding to outside forces was equivalent to disobedience to God, a sin they could not commit. Even within the Anabaptist leadership, cracks began to show. Not all followers agreed with Jan's extreme policies, especially polygamy and the harsh treatment of dissenters. Tensions grew as some questioned whether Jan was truly acting under divine guidance or whether ambition had blinded him. These internal disputes added pressure to the city already under siege. Jan had to balance the enforcement of radical religious law with the need to maintain unity among his followers. He dealt with these challenges through a combination of persuasion, intimidation, and, when necessary, public punishment. At its peak, Münster was a city transformed. Streets were filled with guards, religious ceremonies occurred daily, and citizens lived under constant surveillance.
Jan van Leiden's presence was ubiquitous. He presided over ceremonies, judged disputes, and personally ensured compliance with religious law. The sense of drama was deliberate. Every public act reinforced the idea that Münster was not just a city, but a divine kingdom. Followers were swept up in the spectacle, believing that history itself was unfolding under their eyes. The rebellion was no longer simply political, it was a religious and social experiment of unprecedented scale. Behind the spectacle, however, the human cost was immense. Citizens faced starvation, disease, and relentless pressure to conform. Fear coexisted with devotion, loyalty was demanded, and dissent punished. Families were torn apart by enforced social experiments, polygamy, and property redistribution. Yet for many, the promise of salvation and participation in God's kingdom outweighed personal suffering. Jan van Leiden's genius lay in his ability to make extreme loyalty feel natural. Faith and fear were intertwined. Believers internalized the idea that their suffering was temporary and purposeful, preparing them for eternal reward. This combination of psychological manipulation, charisma, and religious ideology allowed Jan to maintain control in conditions that would have broken ordinary leaders.
Despite Jan's efforts, external pressures mounted. Supplies dwindled, morale waned, and disease took its toll. Neighboring forces tightened the siege, cutting off any hope of reinforcement. Internal dissent grew, and whispers of betrayal circulated. Münster's divine kingdom, built on faith, fear, and charisma, was now under existential threat. Jan, however, remained resolute. He continued to preach, enforce religious law, and maintain the illusion of divine protection. His ability to inspire belief in the impossible would be tested as never before. The stage was set for the final chapter of Münster's rebellion, a dramatic, tragic collapse that would leave a permanent mark on history. By 1534-35, Münster had transformed from a bustling medieval city into a tightly controlled theocratic kingdom under Jan van Leiden. Life in the city was no longer governed by civic rules, but by a strict interpretation of divine law. Every aspect of daily life, work, worship, and social interaction was dictated by the Anabaptist leadership, with Jan himself at the center. For ordinary citizens, the change was dramatic. Streets were patrolled by armed guards loyal to Jan, sermons were held multiple times a day, and participation in religious rituals was mandatory. Citizens quickly learned that obedience was not just recommended, it was essential for survival. Resistance was met with swift and often public punishment, reinforcing the psychological control that Jan exercised over the city. One of the most controversial aspects of Jan's rule was polygamy. He himself married multiple women, claiming that this was divinely mandated to strengthen the faith and populate the city with devoted followers. He argued that this practice was not merely permissible, but necessary, framing it as a religious duty. The announcement of polygamy sent shockwaves through Münster. Some citizens resisted, others accepted it reluctantly, and many of Jan's followers embraced it as proof of divine authority. For women, the experience was complex. Some were motivated by faith, others by fear, and many were caught in a web of obligation and survival. Historians note that Jan's introduction of polygamy was not merely symbolic, it was a test of loyalty and obedience. By demanding adherence to a practice that challenged social norms, he reinforced his absolute authority and created a system where questioning him equaled questioning God. Jan's vision extended beyond personal relationships to economics and social structure. Private property was abolished, and goods were redistributed to ensure equality among the faithful.
Wealthy citizens were required to surrender assets, while the poor gained access to resources previously denied to them. This radical redistribution was framed as justice in the eyes of God. While it appealed to those who had suffered under inequality, it also generated tension among those accustomed to privilege. Disputes over property and resources were adjudicated by Jan and his council, with decisions framed as divinely inspired.
Communal living was enforced rigorously. Citizens shared housing, food, and labor according to Jan's vision of a godly society. Daily schedules were strict, balancing work, prayer, and religious instruction. Life was immersive and intense, with little room for private autonomy. The city had become a living laboratory for Anabaptist ideals, and Jan van Leiden was both architect and absolute authority. Jan understood that controlling a city required more than rules. It required constant psychological reinforcement. He implemented a system of surveillance where informants reported dissent and public punishments demonstrated the consequences of disobedience. Sermons were a central tool of control. Jan delivered speeches emphasizing divine justice, moral purity, and the necessity of obedience. These messages were reinforced through public rituals, processions, and ceremonies, creating a continuous cycle of indoctrination. The psychological impact was profound. Citizens internalized the idea that their actions were constantly observed by both human and divine authority. Fear and devotion were intertwined, making compliance automatic for most. Even those who disagreed with Jan's policies often adhered publicly, unwilling to risk punishment or divine wrath. Daily life under Jan was highly structured. Early mornings began with communal prayers, followed by assigned labor based on skill and need. Artisans worked in guilds, farmers tended communal fields, and merchants were required to contribute to public stores. Religious instruction occurred throughout the day, interspersed with communal meals and obligatory public participation in ceremonies. Even leisure time was regulated. Festivals, music, and recreation were allowed only if they aligned with religious principles and reinforced community cohesion. Personal ambition, private property, and independent decision-making were discouraged, replaced by devotion to the collective and obedience to divine law as interpreted by Jan. Jan's genius as a leader lay not only in religious doctrine, but in his understanding of human psychology. Symbolism and spectacle reinforced his authority. Ceremonial events, dramatic punishments, and highly choreographed rituals created a sense of divine presence in the city. Citizens were constantly reminded that their lives were part of a larger, sacred experiment.
Every public act was designed to strengthen loyalty. Jan used sermons to frame obedience as moral necessity, polygamy as divine command, and communal living as justice. Fear and faith became inseparable, and the psychological pressure to conform was relentless. Despite the strict enforcement of laws and psychological control, challenges persisted. Not all citizens accepted Jan's radical reforms willingly. Resistance, whether private or public, was a constant concern. Some families chafed under communal living rules, while others struggled with polygamy or loss of property. Jan dealt with dissent decisively. Public punishments served as warnings, while ongoing indoctrination reinforced loyalty. In the end, however, the intensity of his rule created both devotion and resentment, a tension that would play a crucial role in the eventual collapse of his kingdom. Münster under Jan van Leiden was a city transformed. It was a theocratic state, a social experiment, and a crucible of human faith and psychology. For the citizens, life was immersive, intense, and inescapable. Fear, devotion, and obedience were intertwined, creating a society unlike any other in Europe at the time. From the outside, Münster was a city under siege, both literally and metaphorically. Inside, every aspect of life was dictated by divine law, enforced by Jan and his loyal followers. The human drama, social experiments, and psychological pressures created a city that was both fascinating and terrifying. By 1535, Münster's kingdom under Jan van Leiden was under immense pressure. The prince-bishop, previously exiled, had allied with neighboring forces to reclaim the city. The siege was relentless. The city's walls were encircled, supplies dwindled, and disease spread among the population. Hunger gnawed at citizens, while fear and fatigue weighed heavily on everyone. Jan remained outwardly confident, preaching that divine protection would deliver the faithful. But the psychological strain was immense. Even the most devoted followers began to question whether their king's promises could withstand the harsh reality of starvation, sickness, and constant bombardment. As external forces tightened their grip, cracks appeared within Münster's inner circle. Some followers grew disillusioned, questioning Jan's leadership and the extreme measures he had enforced. Fear of death, combined with moral doubts, led a few to betray the city, secretly negotiating with the besieging forces. Jan's kingdom, built on loyalty and religious devotion, began to unravel from within. Trust, the foundation of his authority, eroded as betrayal and desperation spread among the defenders. The city's survival now depended not only on holding off attackers, but on maintaining the fragile cohesion of his followers.
In June 1535, the external forces finally breached Münster's defenses. After a prolonged and brutal siege, the city fell. The streets that had once echoed with chants of devotion now ran with the silence of defeat. The dramatic experiment of radical religious governance was over. Jan van Leiden was captured, along with key leaders of the Anabaptist movement. The dream of a new Jerusalem on earth, which had inspired thousands, collapsed in a matter of days. The people who had believed in divine protection were forced to confront the consequences of extremism, fanaticism, and unchecked ambition. Jan and his fellow leaders faced swift trial by the authorities. Their crimes were framed not merely as political rebellion, but as a profound moral and religious transgression. The trial was public, designed as both justice and spectacle, a warning to others who might consider challenging established authority. On January 22, 1536, Jan van Leiden was executed. He was tortured before death, and his body was displayed in a cage hung from St. Lambert's Church in Münster, where it remained as a grim warning for decades. The gruesome display symbolized the ultimate collapse of his vision, a man who had claimed divine authority brought low by the very human forces of justice, retribution, and reality. While Jan's story is often remembered for its spectacle, the siege, the crowning, and the execution, it is also a deeply human tragedy. Thousands of citizens suffered under the pressures of the rebellion, starvation, fear, forced polygamy, and social upheaval. Families were torn apart, trust was broken, and lives were forever altered. The collapse of Münster underscores the dangers of extremism and blind faith. Even the most charismatic leader cannot withstand both internal dissent and external opposition indefinitely. The human cost of ideology, no matter how divinely justified it may seem, is profound. The fall of Jan van Leiden serves as a timeless reminder. It demonstrates how ambition, charisma, and ideology can elevate a man to unimaginable power, but also how unchecked authority, radical social experiments, and extreme religious fervor can lead to inevitable collapse. Münster became a cautionary tale for Europe, a stark illustration of faith, power, and human ambition colliding with reality. The collapse of Münster under Jan van Leiden did more than end a rebellion. It sent shockwaves through Europe.
For historians, the event stands as one of the most vivid examples of religious extremism, charismatic leadership, and radical social experiments in the 16th century. Jan's story is striking because it highlights the intersection of faith and power. He was not a political leader in the traditional sense. He did not inherit authority or wield influence through wealth. Instead, his power arose from the belief of others, the thousands of citizens who saw him as God's chosen instrument. Münster became a living laboratory, revealing how ideology and charisma can temporarily override ordinary social constraints.
The Münster Rebellion also provides insight into the psychology of extremism. Jan van Leiden understood human nature with remarkable precision. He tapped into three fundamental drives: the desire for meaning. People living under uncertainty, famine, or oppression crave a sense of purpose. Jan offered a vision of divine order, where individual struggles were part of a grand plan. The need for belonging. In a fragmented society, joining a religious movement provided community, identity, and protection. Followers were bound together by shared belief and loyalty to Jan. Fear and obedience. Jan combined hope with fear, using religious law, public punishments, and ritualized ceremonies to ensure compliance. By intertwining devotion with discipline, he maintained control even under extreme conditions. Psychologists today note that this combination, charisma, ideology, and fear, remains a common feature of extremist movements. Münster is a historical case study showing how ordinary people can be swept up by radical ideas, even without modern technologies or social media. Although Münster occurred nearly 500 years ago, its lessons remain relevant. Extremism can emerge in any society when political or social institutions fail to meet citizens' needs. Economic disparities leave populations desperate or disenfranchised. Charismatic leaders exploit faith, identity, or ideology to consolidate power. Jan van Leiden's story warns us about the dangers of uncritical obedience and the human tendency to follow authority without questioning consequences. Even well-intentioned social experiments can become destructive when ideology is prioritized over compassion, practicality, or human welfare. Münster also offers a broader reflection on human nature. It shows how individuals seek certainty, justice, and belonging, and how these desires can be manipulated by leaders who promise meaning and reward. The city's citizens were not merely naive, they were responding to very real social pressures: hunger, fear, and inequality. Jan van Leiden's genius lay in harnessing these pressures, turning ordinary people into followers of a radical vision. The tragedy was not only in his ultimate failure, but in the human suffering caused along the way. Today, Münster remains a symbol. St. Lambert's Church still displays the cages where Jan and his followers were hung, a stark reminder of the consequences of extremism. Scholars, theologians, and psychologists study the rebellion not only to understand history, but to understand human behavior, why people follow, how ideologies spread, and how societies can prevent similar tragedies. Jan van Leiden's story also reminds us of the fine line between devotion and fanaticism. Faith can inspire courage, generosity, and resilience, but when combined with absolute authority and unchecked ideology, it can lead to control, suffering, and collapse. As we reflect on Münster, it's important to consider both the historical and personal dimensions of the story. The rebellion was a product of its time, shaped by political fragmentation, religious upheaval, and social pressure, but its lessons are timeless. We are reminded that charisma can be powerful but dangerous if unchecked. Ideology can inspire extraordinary feats, but blind obedience is perilous.
Societies must balance faith, governance, and human welfare to prevent tragedy. Ultimately, the story of Jan van Leiden is not just a tale of a failed rebellion. It is a story about ambition, belief, and the human capacity for both devotion and destruction. Münster shows us that the desire to create a perfect world, guided by ideology or faith, can become a cautionary tale when it ignores the complexity of human life. In a world where extremism, religious, political, or ideological, still exists, the lessons of Münster resonate. They remind us to question, to reflect, and to recognize the human tendencies that allow radical movements to flourish. Jan van Leiden's kingdom may have fallen centuries ago, but the story endures as both a warning and a mirror for humanity.